Welcome back to my channel. It's mid-September and this is about the time I start planning my crochet Halloween costume. The hooded cloak is fairly simple, but it is time consuming, so we need to get a head start so we can finish it in time. I'm using Soft Secret and a 5mm crochet hook, but any medium weight yarn with a 5 or 6mm hook is fine. I chose this yarn because it has a nice luster to it, and it also drapes nicely as it is not quite as stiff as other acrylics out there. I got 8 skeins to be safe, and this is definitely enough for a half-length cloak, but if I have time I'm going to try and go for the full-length cloak, and I might need more yarn. I'll have to do a follow-up video closer to Halloween to show you how it turns out, and I also hope to have the written pattern done by then too, and I'll leave a link in the description box below for both of those when it's done. Okay, let's get started. Begin with a slip knot, and we want to start with a chain that's a multiple of 6 plus 2. So I'll be doing 66 plus 2, or 68. And for wider necklines, just do more than that, like 72 or 78 plus 2 to start, or less than that. As long as it's a multiple of 6 plus 2, you'll be fine. So I'm going to do 68. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 65, 66, 67, 68. Okay, starting row 1, we're going to start in the third chain from the hook. So that's the plus 2 right there that we're just going to skip over and start in the third chain. And we're going to do double crochet. And I'm going to show you that real quick just to refresh your memory. And it is a yarn over, insert through the chain, pull the yarn through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over again, pull through the last 2 loops. So that's the stitch we're going to be doing for this pattern, and go ahead and do 1 double crochet in each chain all the way till the end of your chain. So I'm going to have 66 double crochet, or however many chain you started with, minus the plus 2 is how many stitches you'll have. When you get to the end of row 1, chain 2 and turn your work. Now that chain 2 will not count as our first stitch, so we're going to start with our first double crochet right into that very first stitch. And go ahead and do 1 double crochet in the next 10 stitches. Or this may vary a little bit depending on how many chain you started with. So if you started with 72 chain, you want to do double crochet in the first 11 stitches. If you started with 78 chain, you want to double crochet in the first 12 stitches. So however many chain you started with, divide that by 6, right? Because we're doing multiples of 6. So I started with 66, divided by 6 is 11, and in the 11th stitch we will do an increase. Where am I? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and in our 11th stitch we will do an increase by doing 2 double crochet into that same stitch. Okay, so that's what we're going to repeat for the whole row. We did 10 double crochet and then 2 in the 11th. And if you start with 72, you're going to do 11 double crochet and then 2 in the 12th, and so on and so forth. And we're going to repeat this 6 times, And you should be, when you're at the end of the row, you should be ending with that double crochet. So you have exactly 6 repeats. So again, I'm going to do double crochet in the next 10. Eight, 9, 10, and I'm going to do 2 and the 11th stitch. Okay, so we're doing 6 increases per row. So at the end of this row, you should have 72 stitches, or 6 more stitches than you did in row 1. And I will meet you at the end of this row. Okay, at the end of row 2, you should have ended with that increase of 2 double crochet into the very last stitch. And then chain 2 and turn your work. And again, each row is going to be pretty much the same. We're going to increase by 6 stitches for each row for quite a few rows, depending on how big you want your cloak to be. So we're going to go ahead and start with double crochet again into the very first stitch. And instead of increasing into our 11th stitch, now we're going to increase in our 12th stitch. So each row that you go up, you're going to increase in the next stitch over. Hopefully that makes sense. So we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and now we're going to go to 11, and then we're going to do 2 in the 12th stitch. Alright, so now just repeat that 6 times until you're at the end of the row again. Okay, at the end of row 3, again you should always be ending with the increase, the 2 double crochet in the very last stitch. And chain 2, turn your work. And we're doing the same thing here for row 4, except now we're going to do 12 double crochet and increase in the 13th stitch. 1, 2, 3, 12, and in our 13th stitch we'll do our increase, or if you started with 72 you'll now be in your 14th stitch, and so on and so forth. And this pattern can be a lot of counting, but I'm going to show you a trick right now as to how you can keep going without counting. So we're just going to look and see in our row before, locate that increase, that the 2 double crochet we did is right here. And you're always going to be doing an increase right in the stitch before that. So remember we did 12, and now our increase is in the 13th stitch. So do 2 in that one, and that one will always be right before the increase you did in the previous row. And that might seem weird considering we increased, but remember we added one on the end in the previous row, so it kind of offsets where you do the increase for each row to the stitch right before that. So here I'm going to show you. I'm going to do this next repeat, and I'm not counting because once you get onto your 20th row, you don't really want to be counting all those stitches for every repeat, right? So this is a helpful trick so that you can do this very time-consuming project and watch movies or listen to podcasts or whatever without having to count every single time. And always be looking ahead for when that increase was, and we're going to do our next increase right before that. So you do kind of have to be paying attention to where you're going, but you don't always have to count. Okay, so here's that. See this two double crochet increase right here? We want to increase down the stitch right before that. Right here. And I'll count just to show you. Here's our last increase. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 2 in the 13th. So that's just an easy little hack to keep going with this pattern without having to count every single stitch. Because this is just, it's pretty much a one row repeat for most of the cloak, with the exception of those increases. We're going to do a bunch of rows just like this. I think I went up to like row 30 or 40. I'll let you know. And eventually you stop increasing when you've gotten to a width that you want for your cloak, and then you just continue on without increasing from there. Hopefully that made sense. I'll show you guys some progress pics as I move along. Okay, here we are again. There's that increase in the previous row. Do your increase right in the stitch before that. And that will line you up perfectly for the rest of this part of the pattern. This is the progress at row 32. At this point, I stopped increasing and continued with just one double crochet in each stitch all the way across the row. For larger cloaks, you can keep increasing until you've reached your desired width for the cloak, and then continue without increasing until you've reached your desired length for the cloak. Okay guys, I haven't quite gotten to the length of the cloak that I desire, but that's going to take a long time, and I want to show you how to add the hood right now, just so you know how to do it, because it's going to take me a while to finish this project before I can show you the final outcome. So with new yarn, just begin with another slip knot. Okay, and now we're starting right where we started the cloak. Here's my beginning tail and our original chain of 66, or however many you chose. So we're going to pick up right where we started, and I'm actually going to be working in between these posts just because it's a little bit easier to see, and will give it a little more strength to go in between these posts than to pick up just that one little loop there. So here we got our first two posts, just go right in between them and do a slip stitch. And now chain 2 to start. And we're going to continue with double crochet, but we're going to increase in every other stitch. So what I mean is do one double crochet in that first stitch, or that first space between stitches in our foundation row. And then we're going to do 2 double crochet into the next space. 1, 2. Okay, so that's the repeat we're going to do all the way across. Do 1 double crochet into the next, and 2 into the one after that. Okay, that's what it's looking like. And continue that all the way across. So you should have 1.5 times what you had in that foundation row. So I started with 66, and if we increase in every other stitch, we should have a total of 99 stitches at the end of this row. Okay, here's what row 1 of our hood is looking like. When you get to the end, you're going to chain 2 and turn your work. And now we're just going to continue with 1 double crochet in each stitch. All the way across, and we're going to repeat this for 26 rows, or however many rows it takes you to get to the size hood you want. Most of these numbers are none of them are exact, because depending on the hook size and the yarn size and your size, all these numbers can vary slightly, where you would do less rows if you wanted a smaller hood, or more rows for a bigger hood. So continue with just 1 double crochet in each stitch back and forth for X amount of rows, and then I will show you how to sew up the hood. Here's the side view of the hood after 26 rows. This is the neckline here, this is the front facing part, and this is the top. Now it might look really big right now, but don't worry about that, because what we're going to end up doing is folding this front edge over on both sides. We're going to sew a seam up here, and it's going to create a little tunnel for us to add a cord around the hood if we want, and it also gives it a really nice edge here for around our face. But before we go ahead and do that, we still need to sew up the top part of the hood. So if your yarn is still attached, great. If not, or just grab a small short piece of yarn, and we're going to go ahead and just sew up this top part. I'll show you 2 different ways how to do that, and then we're going to flip this part over, and we're going to sew up a seam along this edge as well, and then our hood will be done. So I'm at the top edge of our hood now. We have our layers folded in half, and all we're going to do is line up these corners and sew a seam down this edge. Now there are 2 ways to do it. If you have a tapestry needle, that might be your easiest bet, to just cut a long tail, thread the needle, and just sew back and forth like so. And I'll show you that in a second. But if you don't have the tapestry needle with your hook, you can just do a slip stitch seam as well. So I'm just going to chain 1 here because that's at the end of the row, and then line up the 2 corners. And the idea here is picking up just 1 loop from each side. So I'm going to pick up this loop here and this loop here. It's a little hard to see in the first one, but you just do a slip stitch. And then here you can see a little bit better now, but these 2 loops that are pretty much touching, when you hold the 2 sides together, just pick up 1 loop from each side, slip stitch. 1 loop from each side, slip stitch, all the way across. Now it's pretty much the same with the tapestry needle. You would just thread through the end of the needle, and you would pick up the same 2 loops, and you would just pull all the way through, and then come back down through the next 2 loops, pull all the way through. like so, until you get to the other end, in which you will just tie off your yarn and weave it in or knot it, or however you like to end that. And then I'll show you how to do that last part where we flip this over and sew one more edge along the hood. Okay, here's the hood where we're going to be folding it over. I know it's kind of hard to see this whole thing in my small camera frame, but this is the front edge that we're going to be folding over. Here's that top edge we just sewed. Oh yeah, make sure your seam here is on the inside, so let's flip this thing over. Okay, now here's the neckline, and we're going to fold over. How much you fold over can vary depending on how deep you want the hood to be. So the more you fold it over, see, mine's pretty deep, so I'm going to give a good hem or seam here, maybe about 2 or 3 inches. And we'll probably taper off at the bottom a little bit. And we're going to start sewing about here, because we want to leave a little space here to insert a cord around the hood. If you wish to do that, you don't have to, but if you want to, leave a space. Otherwise, starting down here is fine. And the tapestry needle is going to come in really handy for this part. Now you can use the crochet hook slip stitch method that I just showed you, where you just pick up, you know, a loop from this end, or a loop, or maybe even a whole post, since it's not as clear when you're working up the side of rows here exactly where you're going, or to keep a straight line. It's a little bit trickier to do the slip stitch method with the hook. So if you have the yarn needle, I'd definitely use it for this part. And thread a long piece of yarn. I did about 2 arms lengths. And I'm going to leave a long tail and then tie a knot up here. Okay, we want to start from the inside of the work. So find out where you want to start, either down here or up here if you want to add a cord. And just work through both sides. I'll get kind of on the edge there. And pull it through a little bit. You know what, we should just weave in this end right now if possible. And so I'm just going to weave back and forth through these couple stitches just so that this end is already woven in and won't pull through on us. And make sure you go over one loop there so it doesn't pull through on your way back. Okay, now we're ready to just do, it's pretty much a basic running stitch where we're just going to go down through the work and then back up. And it doesn't matter too much where you're going, like in between the top part of the stitch or in between the posts. Just stay on the edge here. That's what's going on here. There we go. And make sure your work is straight. If you have some T-pins, it might be helpful to pin this up a little bit. That's actually a great idea. But before I go and grab those, I'm just going to show you real quick. Just go back and forth, just like a running stitch, all the way up this edge. And don't pull it too tight, otherwise it's gonna bunch up. So make sure you keep it a little tension on there. And just go ahead and continue the running stitch all the way up and back down the other side. And you leave a long tail, just cut the yarn, weave it in, and this part of the hood will be done. Make sure you're only going through these 2 sides and not accidentally sewing the whole thing together. So hopefully that all made sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions below in the comments, and be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on the Crochet Hooded Cloak Part 2 when I show you the finished item with all the final details. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned.